Hey Dan, let's get into this. I feel that we were just talking about team sizes, and as the company grows, they start to shift in terms of like where the knowledge, specifically the customer knowledge, comes from, and then how you dictate what to work on and when, according to
Yep,
how that changes. And I feel like Series C, Series D organizations, they're a few hundred strong, and I think the leaders and the founders go from these like product leaders into like organizational leaders, and so they need to
definitely.
create systems where they can trust their product owners to live on the front lines and make the good choices. And some organizations grow systems with that trust, and some of them don't. They retain this like project management mindset where they're dictating
Yep.
roadmaps down to teams. This is the heart of what I wanted to talk about, like how organizations are structured and operate, and then specifically how experimentation and testing kind of fits in there. I think you are a really interesting person to talk to because you've lived on a couple sides of the spectrum. Um, one at Codecademy, which represents that small, like growth stage kind of
Yep.
startup. You had a centralized team there. I know that because we worked together
Yep.
on that one. That was great, and but it was kind of a growth squad, and we were doing what we needed to do where we needed to do it. So there was accountability, but it was small enough to have that.
Yes.
These other teams weren't doing that. And then on the other side of the experimentation spectrum, you worked at Uber, and so this is where you have kind of extreme scale and sort of product ownership structure. And so experimentation is just in the DNA. Like there's just these aligned autonomous pods, and you're just running, and you're owning your metric, and you're doing what you think is right. Um,
Yep.
would you mirror that, like how I did it? Would you reflect that? I'm speaking for you in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
but how do you view those two roles and across that spectrum? Do you agree with sort of how I characterized it there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say like most startups, there's kind of like a spectrum of how product gets done. When startups are really small and it's just the founders and a handful of engineers, almost everything is built from founder intuition. So it's like founders understand their market, they did tons of research, uh, and then like they kind of dictate the roadmap, and you ship really, really quickly, but without a ton of like precise measurement on the impact. At some point, as companies like scale, the teams get bigger, revenue gets bigger. The founders step into more like building the company role, and you need to be more systematic in how product gets developed. And you tend to build more of like a pod led OKR structured world, which is where like the vast majority of the big tech worlds are. So you have a product teams, each division gets OKRs, those OKRs filter down different pods. Those pods build a roadmap to try to move those numbers up to the direction that they want to go. And then you use experimentation as a way of like confirming that you're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, nice. And so this is where I think that the crux is because some of the organizations out there in the world and are not that way. They don't work like Uber and Netflix and
Yep.
Spotify and Booking and such. They're not what I would call this product. They don't run this product operating model. In this language, it's a little bit new to me, but I'm discovering it in this interview series. There's organizations that are running this project management operational style, also known as an IT culture. Also, I've heard some people talk about it being like a lot of organizations are either marketing led or sales led. Some of these
Mm-hmm.
legacy organizations, especially, where you can imagine a world where a marketer has got a crazy idea to build something, and they kind of shove it over a Jira wall, and there's like a kind of a service
Yep.
behind there that builds it, and then it comes back, and then it has to be, so it's already implemented. So it's a waterfall type thing there. What is your experience on doing that? And, that product operating model at Uber relative to those Jira walls and that way of working. Maybe you want to take that question from the angle of like, how was your team built there with regards to that pod or that squad? Did you have all the
Mm.
resources there locally? You owned your own roadmap. You were aiming at the metrics. Like, did you have the not only the responsibility but the authority and the resources to run your roadmap?
Yeah, I think I've been fortunate in both scenarios where both of the Codecademy and Uber are very much like product-led organizations. So typically, like you get a goal or a target, you're paired with an engineering manager who has somewhere between 6 and maybe 20 engineers under them, depending on what you're working on. You have a designer who's allocated to your team. You either have data science support in that they're directly allocated to your team, or you have a central pod and self-service tools of data scientists. So you pretty much have all the resources that you need to move towards your goal. And it's really like your job as the product manager to like craft and shape the roadmap to give you the highest likelihood of success to hit that goal.
Now, so how do you think experimentation fits into this? I mean, you probably look at it from what I glean as kind of a tool in the toolbox. You mentioned validation. It's coming
Yeah.
in to kind of validate, give you numbers that you're moving in the right direction. Um, there's a lot of organizations that are implementing centers of excellence here that I'm interviewing as part of the series. And in this way, they're elevating the function quite a bit within the organization, which I think is good. Um, but like eventually, I think it goes to that pod system where it's just a tool in the toolbox and it's spread out and it's so universal that everyone's doing it. But there's a ton of organizations where that's not actually the case. Even
Mm.
large organizations where you have one siloed team doing experimentation, and it's looked at as almost like a channel to get revenue or something like that, not to do that validation work. And the way to solve that, the way to spread it is through first a center of excellence, to where you educate, you make the tools accessible and available and all that kind of stuff. Um, have you experienced any of that, or what's your viewpoint on kind of that transition going through that center of excellence? Or maybe you just have been lucky in those two roles that you had and didn't kind of feel that pain that a lot of people are there in the middle of that midwit diagram, I think. They're right in
Yeah.
the middle and feeling the pain of that center of excellence standpoint.
Yes, I'll describe a little more of my background where like, I joined Codecademy when there were 20 people. I probably saw it through to 200. And, the years kind of blur together, but I feel like we started working together when there were like around 100 people there. So I saw Codecademy kind of evolve from like almost nothing was A/B tested to like we A/B tested kind of the important stuff. I think A/B testing to me is definitely a tool in the toolbox. My kind of philosophy on it is like it should be used as selectively as possible, but you should be fully competent and able to use it because there's scenarios where you're changing something that either is very high risk or is so complicated you're not going to be able to just look at the rest of your metrics and understand what that really did for the business. The other end of the spectrum is definitely Uber, where like 100% of things that I saw while I was there were A/B tested. Everything from like data infrastructure upgrades, like changing in the database in a way that nothing should be visible to users, all the way like through changes on the front end of the product. Like 100% of things got A/B tested, which is its own both like strength but also like weakness in certain ways.
Hmm. Yeah. Awesome. Can you talk to me a little bit about, and this will be my last question set, and I tend to end these little interviews with this question around kind of circling back to the product operating model and incentives, right? So you mentioned that the product owners kind of focused on this goal and they're using the resources around them to focus in on that. Talk to me about how the different teams, so across pods, stay aligned. And there's terms like goal tree maps, OKRs
Yep.
are a tool for this. Talk to me about how you get that alignment across those pods and that incentives with that team, because I think it's particularly powerful when you get, like, for example, a designer and an engineer that is sitting constantly at that same table as the product owner, and they have kind of skin in the game in the same way. They're
Yeah.
incentivized with that same mindset of like, we're actually solving a problem. I'm not just building code, right?
Yep.
And so talk to me a little bit of that world, maybe across those two roles that you had, and just incentives and goal trees, OKRs, that kind of world.
Yeah, too, there's almost like there's two places that happen. There's like outside of the pod and inside the pod. So outside the pod, typically like in a group or a division of product teams, you have kind of like the overall division, like in Uber, it's the consumer side of the Eats application is where I work. and that side of the org has goals. And at the beginning of a quarter, like you're choosing your OKRs and you're running them by your VP of Director of Product to make sure that like your OKRs ladder up to the other OKRs. You're then building a roadmap, and there's kind of like a maybe 2 to 3 week planning cycle where you're cross-checking with other teams to make sure, like we're anticipating a database upgrade over here on this side of the organization. We're going to use that in this product. Like, is that on your roadmap? And like, are you doing kind of like your job as a product manager to make sure that like you are aligned and unblocked as much as possible from the other teams? And I'd say like inside the team, it's really kind of traditionally up to the PM, the engineering manager, the designer, whoever else is in kind of like the leadership pod of the team, to make sure you're drawing the connection for the engineers and the designers of like what we did, how the numbers moved, and then how that impacts your organization. So that's done in a bunch of ways. Sometimes it's dedicated meetings. Sometimes you're showing dashboards at the beginning of stand-up. Sometimes you're doing it over email reporting. But it's really making sure that like, the product pods are moving in the same direction. And then also like the inside the pod, they understand what they're doing and why.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, Dan. I hit my 3-question set there.
Sweet.
Appreciate it. I like to keep these nice and concise. Anything else to add on this topic or around experimentation?
No, I mean, I think like, learning experimentation was a big kind of like jump forward in my own abilities. I think it's like so long as teams are attempting to draw the connection between like what they did and what it meant to the business, I think you're like moving in the right direction. I think like way back when we were working together, when we were figuring out how to run experiments, there's a lot of like tooling setup that has to happen. There's a lot of like correct analytics setup that has to happen. There's like your own kind of high level knowledge of statistics to make sure you're kind of drawing the right conclusions from data. But kind of step 0 is like, do you have targets? Are you looking at what you shipped? Is what you shipped impacting those targets? And can you understand why or why not? Experiments give you like a really clear lens on that question. But practically speaking, in a lot of like up and coming startups, you won't have the bandwidth to A/B test everything. But you still should be attempting to draw that kind of like cause and effect relationship.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that's great. Kind of good way of looking at it. Cool. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Ben.